time in this country, a long time ago, when reading wasn't just for fags, and neither was writing. People wrote books and movies that had stories, so you cared whose ass it was and why it was farting, and I believe that time could come again.
Hello, and welcome to the Think Liberty podcast. I'm Caitlin Cloven, and this is episode 66. We've got a lot to cover this week. Mark Zuckerberg made the news once again, and Europe banned memes. And of course, Joe Biden is being a total creep again. So it's been a crazy week for sure. I'm joined this week by Matthew McGowan. Matthew, how are you, man?
I am fantastic. How are you?
Doing pretty good. It's a pretty good weekend until it started snowing again. Not a fan of that, but...
Oh, yeah, we got cold again this weekend too, but luckily we avoided the white stuff.
Lucky you. It didn't stink,
yes.
so we're doing all right.
Right on. Hey, spring's around the corner.
Thank God for that.
Amen.
Also joining us is Lonie Dupree. Lonie, what's new lately?
Same old. I am in Louisiana, so it is doing the exact opposite of snowing. It's actually kind of hot. So I don't know if that's lucky or not. Maybe y'all might appreciate some of that, but I don't know.
I'm just jealous. Definitely jealous.
Yeah, I could totally go for some of that.
Yeah. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started off. Matthew, when we were planning this episode, you brought up Article 13 in the EU. Why don't you give us a little background into what that is and what it means?
Okay, so the EU recently passed something called the Directive on Copyright. To make a long story short, there is a section of this directive that's known as Article 13, which what this specifically covers is online content sharing service providers and right holders shall cooperate in good faith in order to ensure that unauthorized protected works or other subject matter are not available on their services. So basically what they're saying here is any websites that host large amounts of user-generated content, think something like YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, they're responsible for taking down the content that if it infringes on copyrights. Seems pretty cut and dry. However, there's a lot of controversy on exactly how that would happen. There's an earlier version of this directive that spoke of proportionate content recognition technologies. So basically, they're scanning images as they're uploaded. So one of the reasons this concerns people when it relates to memes is because a lot of times memes are based on copyrighted images. Now, the people who put forth this directive are saying that, things like memes are covered and protected because, they're parodies, so they're not really required to be removed. However, the problem is that these filters that they'll have to use aren't going to be able to distinguish between memes and other copyrighted material. So the concern is that it's some sort of blanket ban on memes. Now, I take particular interest. You guys know me well. I love my memes. And what interests me the most is, people can say what they want, but memes have become a very major part of political discourse. I personally think that the liberty movement is gaining more steam through the use of memes and things of that nature to reach people, to get them thinking on subjects, to get them talking and get them researching. There's a lot of people who would credit winning the meme wars for putting Trump in office. So then you start to worry, if I'm going to get out my Alex Jones tinfoil hat here, and you wonder if they're not trying to stifle a form of political speech and a form of political speech they cannot control.
That's definitely concerning. Mostly because it's going to be left up to algorithms, not human moderators.
Right. It seems whenever they
parody.
it seems whenever they put those kind of things in place, those kind of measures, it just catches everything and filters it out.
Well, of course, laws like this never lead to their desired consequence. So
absolutely,
kind of take on a mind of its own. But that's a really good point that you bring up, that it's kind of an indirect way to stifle political discourse. You know, in the last 5, maybe 10 years or so, you've seen this huge shift to social media discourse when it comes to politics. And a large part of that is memes. You know, memes start the conversation. They get people talking. And at least in the EU, like this may be like a major game changer for political discourse.
You know, it's funny. I hear talk around different state parties from people that I know that are involved, and there's such a resistance from certain. I don't know if it's a generational thing, but there's definitely resistance from certain areas as far as sharing memes on official LP pages or state pages, things like that.
I have come across quite a bit of that. Well,
yeah,
in the LP.
You know, and it's
a couple
amazing.
State parties that a friend of mine interacted with lately that were very against posting memes because they were unprofessional, and I argue that they may come off as unprofessional, but when it comes to social media, and you're a political party who's already the underdog, certain professional standards aren't really. Like, they don't really apply to you in this medium. You know, you go to events, you be professional, but when you're on the internet, you have to play the game.
Well, and it's just, you know, culture changes over the years, and what may be deemed unprofessional by one generation may be very appealing to and very normal to the other. I mean, you know, you think of the older folks might tell you stories about Elvis back in the day and how they would get freaked out because he shook his hips. You look at the popular culture now, I mean, that's tame as shit, you know, so
yeah. People make fun of that as too tame.
Right. Exactly. You know, so while, you know, certain folks in certain segments of the party might be like, oh, well, memes are unprofessional. They might have a bad word, or, you know, they certainly aren't as polished as a 500 word or 1,000 word article on a subject. It's, you know what, people are reading the meme and sharing the meme. And it's what the cultural norm is now.
Definitely. You know, kids, I hate saying kids these days. God, it makes me feel old. But it's true. Kids these days, I mean, they communicate through memes. And I kind of do this as well. Like,
absolutely.
Communication is almost solely memes on the internet. Like, there's entire groups for it with hundreds of thousands of people for just memes. Like, it's really appealing to me, this whole professionalism thing, because, you know, I do work in social media. Like, that's my job. I always tell my customers and my clients, you know, you have to adapt to the platform that you're on. And when you're on Facebook, you have to communicate in the way that the people on the platform are communicating. Otherwise, you're completely irrelevant. So bringing it back to, you know, the European thing, there's a lot of political divisiveness and political unrest going on in Europe, especially, you know, France right now, stifling a form of political speech, even if it's indirect. And, you know, they say it's protected, but you know that that's going to be an unintended consequence. It's going to be really hard for people to communicate and stay relevant on these platforms, you know, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, especially.
Absolutely. You know, imagine you're a European socialist and you're looking across the pond at America, and, you know, you see Donald Trump and you're like, you know, this guy's an idiot. There's no way he could win. And he does. And you start examining what propelled him to victory. And, it's easy to blame it on Russian bots. I'm sure we've all three been called a Russian bot at some time.
Oh, several times. I actually made that my profile picture filter for a while.
I do recall that. Well, and you think about these kind of folks, and they start drilling down a little more once they figure it out it's not the Russians, and, you know, maybe they're a little late to the game in discovering 4chan and how that meme culture in a lot of ways propelled Trump with crowds he may not have otherwise connected with. And, you know, you look around Europe and you start getting scared. You don't want a fucking Trump over there. So, you know, you stab at whatever you think may be impactful, and something like this, of course, you can sell it because you're trying to protect artists and their copyrighted images. But really, I mean, you're not making money off memes unless you're one of those lucky Yang people, which I'm still waiting on the how to join that group. But,
man,
yeah, you're not making, the only thing you're exchanging is ideas. And to shut that down, there's something nefarious about it beyond the normal government just trying to control shit. That's a very veiled attack on free speech, in my view.
Definitely. And, it kind of, it's definitely an attack on free speech, but it also has this larger issue of intellectual property and copyrights and stuff like that. Like, can you really own an image? Like, right. Once it's out there on the internet, like, should you really be able to own it since it can be copied and, changed and whatever? Like, it's so silly to me, the whole copyright thing on images.
Yeah.
What I find interesting is if it is some sort of weird plot to stifle speech, what people are going to do is they're just going to start drawing their own memes.
I have seen a few of those, and they're wonderful, where people sketch out the images.
Right.
From popular templates. It's so great.
Right. So they're just going to start doing that, and the whole plan is just going to fail. People are going to create uncopyrighted images that they drew themselves, and that's how that's going to go.
Freedom always finds a way.
Right.
Definitely. Now, Lonie, why don't you get us into the Mark Zuckerberg situation? He made the news again this week for general Mark Zuckerbergness.
Oh, yeah, because it actually, it might somewhat tie into that to an extent. Let's see. I have the article here. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm sure it'll be linked in the show notes. But it's titled, Mark Zuckerberg calls for more government regulation of internet. Quote, we have too much power. So he's asking for stricter controls amid fears over election interference and rise of white nationalism, which, of course, that's the new scary thing.
Well, yeah, after New Zealand and the fact that the shooter was able to live stream for over 30 minutes of him slaughtering all these people.
Right.
It's very interesting to me that he wants to ask the government to regulate the platform after he sat in front of this Senate panel while they questioned him on basic internet things. Like, he wants the same government that asked him, what was it, like, how do I control my email on my phone, to regulate his platform? Has he lost his mind?
Right. So it goes in. Mark Zuckerberg has called for governments and regulators to play a more active role in establishing rules to control the internet. He called for a stricter regulation of harmful content, election integrity, privacy and data portability in an op-ed published on Saturday in the Washington Post. Every day we make decisions about what speech is harmful, what constitutes political advertising, and how to prevent sophisticated cyber attacks, Mr. Zuckerberg wrote. Let's see. Goes on. These are important for keeping our community safe, but if we were starting from scratch, we wouldn't ask companies to make these judgments alone. Lawmakers often tell me we have too much power over speech, and frankly, I agree.
Well, do a better job of regulating your platform then. It's a very simple thing.
Yeah, I mean, hire more people, create different kind of algorithms that can, detect some of these kind of things.
Like, I'm not a fan of these platforms, censoring people. Obviously, like, I'm not a big fan of that, especially, since we're involved in political stuff on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Like, we suffer from some censorship, I would guess.
Right.
And people in our
but I would rather it come from the website.
Through this, but obviously, like, I don't want the government to be involved in this.
Right.
Is when you have, a Democratic majority or a Republican majority, they're going to try and stifle the other side through well-meaning legislation. So that's going to come directly down through the social media platforms. We do not want the government to control social media at all.
Right.
And
exactly.
He mentions the advertising platform on Facebook, where you can run ads on Facebook pages for political candidates or political content. And he does make a good point that political advertisers are adapting to his new advertising policy, because within the last year he's rolled out a new advertising policy where people have to get verified. Like, you have to verify your identity before you can run political ads. It's fairly easy to get verified, but it's very hard to fake. Like, you pretty much do have to be a real person to get verified to run ads. You can't have a fake profile, that kind of thing. They run your driver's license and run that up against your address and stuff. So, I mean, people are finding a way around that by running not specifically, like, their ads are not specifically for candidates. They're doing issue stuff, and they're doing it not even during election years. They're doing it in off years. So, yes, it can be a little hard to catch that stuff, but you really don't want a government who has an agenda with what they want to pass controlling what that content or what content is going to be allowed to be advertised.
Right. Absolutely not.
It seems to me it's almost as if he wants to pass the buck. It's kind of like the filter technology we talked about as far as the copyrighted images. He knows it's going to catch a lot more than white nationalists or Russian bots. So he can say, hey, man, this is the government imposing this. This isn't me. I just wanted to control those aspects, not all this. And another thing, I don't know about you guys, but me personally, I'm a big believer in sunshine being the best disinfectant. I mean, I want to know who those people are.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't agree with the whole no platform bullshit that a lot of people have, come up with lately. Like, don't give the Nazis a platform. Give them all the platforms.
Amen.
I want to know exactly who they are so I can choose to disassociate from all of those fucks. Like, no.
Right.
We want to know exactly what they think and exactly who they are, and we want them to all come out of the woodwork and not hide, because we need to know who to not associate with.
Right. Well, like with y'all, it's like it could be like an association kind of thing. With me being a brown person, with the way some people could possibly be, depending on how crazy they may want to be that day. It could mean, life or death for some people. And it would be very, very useful information for these people to have, to be like, hey, maybe I should not talk to that person. Maybe I should not go to this business, which is ran by such and such person who believes in whatever. That's very, very useful information.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of people bring up the point that, giving these people a platform will help them spread their message and maybe convert other people who were maybe kind of leaning that way already. And I do think that is a valid criticism. You kind of see this on, 4chan and other alternative platforms. People do get radicalized on the internet. They just do. It's a very unfortunate fact, but it happens. And it happens in all political ideology. Like, a lot of us came to libertarianism because of the internet, because of social media, and because, talking to people in, the particular ideology. They helped us, change our views.
Well, and that's, I think what it also does, though, is, I think it's a more useful tool for them to recruit when you stifle their speech. When they can say that we're repressed, that they're shutting us down, they're not letting us speak. Exactly. It makes them the victim, and I think that's a more powerful recruiting tool among people who feel marginalized for whatever reason, and that's a big target for the white nationalists.
Right.
Let's not make them martyrs.
You know, they're going after people who feel that they're already being persecuted for whatever beliefs they have, or, you know, whatever sad situation that led them to seeking out friends on the internet. Whatever it is, they're playing on psychology. So definitely, you know, pulling the victim card and saying, look, we're being oppressed, like that definitely helps with it. And that's kind of the counterpoint to the arguments that it's used as a recruiting tool. Like, yes, they might be able to recruit more people if they have a bigger platform, but you're also going to have the massive backlash on record of all of these people. You know, you're going to go to their Facebook page that's still up, and you're going to see 100,000 people saying you're a fucking idiot. Like,
right.
Your views are terrible. You're a horrible person. I think that speaks a little bit louder, and that having that on the record is good.
You know, and I think that I can give you an example here in Cincinnati. We had, there was a local high school, and I can't remember the specific reason. I think they had a gay group after school for students. And so they were targeted by Westboro Baptist. And so, you know, all the libertarians around here and, you know, and some others were like, fucking, hey, we're going to go and we're going to counter protest. And, you know, we're going to get up in these fucking idiots' faces and tell them they're fucking idiots. And a group of parents got together and they kind of put out the word and they said, hey, you know what? We think that a more powerful counter protest would be just not to show up, to not give them the time of day. They can go out, they can do their speech, they can stand on the corner and scream bloody murder. But if no one's there, no one's going to pay attention. And that's what happened. And they never fucking came back, you know? And I don't know if somebody was trying to shut down that protest, if somebody was trying to say, no, you can't go out and speak your mind because it's hateful, then who knows how many people they recruit. But they didn't recruit a single one from that event. So, you know, I understand why people want to suppress repugnant speech. I mean, if you're a decent human being, you don't want to hear that shit. But it's precisely why we have to let people hear it.
Right. And, you know, there's features on social media to where you don't have to see that kind of shit. You know what I mean? Like, you can block people, you can hide posts, there's all of these mechanisms built into social media, so you can build your own bubble if you so choose. I choose not to do that. Like, I have a no block policy unless someone's just being a creep. But I don't block people for disagreements or things that I don't like, because I like to see all points of view. I may not ever agree with all points of view, but I like to see it so I can judge my own point of view against theirs and see if I'm still on the right path. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And if there's somebody who I know, you know, what they're advocating runs opposite of what I am, I absolutely want to hear their points because I want to know how to refute it, you know, and there may be the occasional time where I hear it and I'm like, holy shit, they're right. But more often than not, I same thing you do. I want to hear all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I spend a lot of time in Democrat and progressive groups because I mean, even though they argue horribly, it's still really good practice to like really understand their points of view, see where they're coming from. So you're not just making generic libertarian, like, government bad arguments. You know, you don't want to come off as very basic when you're arguing, because they can very easily just be like, okay, well, you clearly have no idea what you're talking about, so I'm not going to listen to you anymore at all.
Right. I really love dropping
you really have to understand the other side. And
Amen.
I think that's really important in political discourse. And, you know, bringing it back to Zuckerberg, you know, you mentioned him passing the buck. I think that's exactly what he's doing. That way, you know, he doesn't have responsibility anymore. Once things go wrong, he can blame it on lawmakers. Yep. And then when something does go wrong, inevitably, because it's social media and things are constantly changing and, you know, the government's not going to keep up with it. When something does go wrong, then the government can come in and say, oh, well, we didn't have enough power, so we're going to go ahead and, you know, make Facebook a public utility, and we're going to have complete control. And it's a really bad precedent to set, having government control the internet.
Absolutely.
Because then you get things like China, where they've deleted Facebook, or they censor everybody on Facebook and all these other.
No,
platforms.
They have their own social media sites and their own. I think they have like their own Google.
They do. They have their own Google. They have their own Facebook, and I think their own Twitter. It's something.
Yeah,
like
they're not called Google, Facebook, and Twitter, but it's their own weird censored communist version of it, and it's weird.
Heavily censored. It was actually a really interesting story I heard about the Me Too movement in China. Once it got to China after a couple months, information doesn't flow very freely over the sea. But anyway, so the Me Too movement started up where a student in China spoke up about a professor harassing her, and that was the beginning of their Me Too movement. Within a week, I think it was, all of the posts surrounding the Me Too thing were taken off of all of their social media platforms because they didn't want civil unrest. And that's something that they stress very heavily in their censorship, is anything that can lead to civil unrest or backlash or anything against the current regime, they shut it down immediately. It's actually pretty fascinating once you learn a bit about Chinese censorship and how people are adapting to it over there.
It's especially fascinating when you compare it to what they're proposing here. It's almost the exact same thing.
Yeah.
We want to shut down this white nationalism. We don't want to platform it. We don't want violence. Yeah, that's exactly what you're going to create.
Yeah. I really don't want Chinese censorship in the U.S. That would not be good, because then they decide, after it's white nationalism that they don't like, then it's anti-government rhetoric that they don't like. And then all libertarians are screwed, basically. Yeah,
they'll finally start paying attention to us.
Yeah. So
a little bit too much.
Yeah, no kidding. So moving on, the Democratic race is getting its own dose of sexual harassment claims lately. Speaking of the Me Too movement, Joe Biden, the assumed frontrunner for the presidential nomination, is being accused of basically being a giant creep, which, if you've seen the photos of him completely ignoring the concept of personal space, this doesn't really come as a huge shock.
He's affectionate.
Yeah. The key word here is consent, though. Like, if you can tell somebody is uncomfortable, which you can clearly see in these photos and these videos that are circulating, that people are very uncomfortable. Yeah. Like, he doesn't have to be so creepy about it.
No, that was something I saw on Twitter. His affectionate attitudes towards women are coming under unfair whatever or something like that. I was like, oh, well, so that's what they're calling it.
Yeah. It's really interesting to see the Democratic reaction to this. People, who just identify as Democrats, not really elected officials or anything, but yeah, people are kind of pulling the Republican card and saying that these women should have come out, earlier and said something when it happened, oh, don't believe them. It's just a political move. It's disgusting, really.
Yes, it's the Roy Moore thing all over again.
Yeah. So anyway, Lucy Flores, she was a candidate for lieutenant governor of Nevada in 2014. She accused Biden of grabbing her shoulders and kissing the back of her head during a campaign event for her lieutenant governor race. She said, I found my way to the holding room for the speakers where everyone was chatting, taking photos, and getting ready to speak to the hundreds of voters in the audience. Just before the speeches, we were ushered to the side of the stage where we were lined up by order of introduction. As I was taking deep breaths and preparing myself to make my case to the crowd, I felt 2 hands on my shoulders. I froze. Why is the Vice President of the United States touching me? She says Biden then leaned in and I quote, inhaled her hair before kissing her. He proceeded to plant a big, slow kiss on the back of my head. My brain couldn't process what was happening. I was embarrassed. I was shocked. I was confused. I couldn't move, and I couldn't say anything. I wanted nothing more than to get Biden away from me. My name was called, and I was never happier to get on stage in front of an audience. Holy shit! He inhaled her hair.
Look, Go ahead.
This is horrible.
I've been.
It's so funny.
Yeah, I'm sure Matthew will probably, one up me on this one. I've been married for 5-6 years, something like that. I don't know. Been knowing my wife about 8.
I hope your wife doesn't listen to this. You're in trouble.
Well, if I were to do that, if I were to just come up behind her, grab her shoulders, smell her hair, and then kiss her on the back of the head, she would probably elbow me in the ribs or something like that, because that's weird. That's weird to do to anybody, regardless of who they are, even if it's your spouse. That's weird.
And, he kind of gets this privilege because he's the vice president. It's just like when Donald Trump says, well, when you're famous, they let you do it. It's the same kind of privilege, him being vice president, and he just gets to go up to random women who are running for office and sniff their hair. Like, that's completely normal. And then a big slow kiss on the back of her head. That's just, it's a bit much.
A bit. And it's funny because I've seen the images and I've seen some of the videos, and there's no better way to describe it. I mean, he's right up on the back of their head and he's just like, and it's a little creepy.
Yeah. Anyways, so Amy Lapos, another woman, she was a woman from Connecticut. She was at a fundraiser for it was in 2009 for the man she worked for. He was a congressman. Biden was at this event giving a speech, and then they went inside. There weren't any cameras around, so there's no way to corroborate the story. But she came out and says that Biden came up to her, and it wasn't sexual, but he did grab me by the head. He put his hand around my neck and pulled me in to rub noses with me. When he was pulling me in, I thought he was going to kiss me on the mouth. She went on to say, I never filed a complaint, to be honest, because he was the vice president and I was a nobody. There's absolutely a line of decency. There's a line of respect. Crossing that line is not grandfatherly. It's not cultural. It's not affection. It's sexism or misogyny. And I think that last line there that she says is really, really powerful. I'm a woman who works in politics. Sometimes people get weird. And there is, a line of decency and respect, and sometimes people cross it, and it's not always acceptable to speak out. Socially acceptable, at least. Immediately speaking out against this kind of stuff, it's much easier to just sweep it under the rug and move on and continue with your career. So I definitely understand where she's coming from. But yeah, can he not be so weird? Like, just grabbing her by the head and rubbing noses with her. Like, who does that?
Joe Biden.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like it's you touched on it before with Trump saying, when you're famous, you can do it. These guys, people like Joe Biden, people like going back to Bill Clinton, people like Roy Moore, they've been in power for a long time. And I mean, they're used to having their way, that it isn't until recently that people started to push back on that shit.
Yeah, it's really enlightening to, go into these Democratic Facebook groups and see people using the same exact excuses and the same exact justifications for Biden's behavior that Republicans used for Trump and Roy Moore and even Kavanaugh when the Kavanaugh shit was going on. And, let's take guilt out of the equation and just talk about the discourse surrounding it. People were up in arms over Kavanaugh and Trump and Roy Moore, saying, "Oh, these women should have come out whenever it happened. There's no excuse why they should have, swept it under the rug, and they're only doing it now because it's a political move." Even if it's a political move, does it make it any less shitty that it happened?
That's what we were told during Kavanaugh. So.
Yeah, taking the guilt out of it, or whether he did it or not, it doesn't even matter in this instance. It's the Democrats and, liberals and progressives that are pushing this believe all women line, which is kind of dangerous in and of itself, but that's another issue. But it's just really interesting to see when the tables are turned that all of that goes out the window. they're becoming the most misogynist, sexist people I wouldn't say ever seen, because I've seen it pretty recently with the Trump shit, but it's just really funny how decency and principles and morals go completely out the window when it's your guy.
You've got a long history recorded on video of, at best, deeply inappropriate behavior by Joe Biden.
Yes.
And it's not just women. It's not just like grown women too.
No,
and a lot of people are bringing that up too, that it's, it's not just women, and that it's grandfatherly behavior, or it's just how he is. He's affectionate.
My grandfather never did that to me.
Right.
Yes.
I don't know about y'all's grandfather, but
somebody snagged
even
one
if
of my
that's the
kids
case,
like that, man.
And he's affectionate or whatever. You're not affectionate with strangers when you're in a position of power.
No.
I
teach my kids to run from people like that.
Exactly. This is like stranger danger level of creepy.
Yes. Totally.
Anyway,
but it's defended. It's defended, and I'm told that Trump's a monster because of a consensual behavior he engaged in, or is alleged to have engaged in.
Alleged.
I mean, that there's nothing.
I do think that video was him admitting to being a total creep and using his position of power to take advantage of women and putting them in a position where they felt that they couldn't speak out. So it really is kind of the same exact thing. It's even worse because he was vice president. You have people coming to the White House for events, and they're, up at a podium in front of all of this press, and then you have the vice president like sniffing your hair. Like, what are you supposed to do? Turn around and slap him? Like, no.
Yeah, they just slowly shy away and pull away, and I mean, there's so many videos where it's a clear level of discomfort, and everybody's just like, no, that's cool. I mean, he's just being grandfatherly. The fuck out of here.
Right. I like grandfatherly. That's, I don't know. My dad doesn't do that to my daughter. He has never done that to any of his grandchildren. I rarely see any people that have grandchildren do that to their grandchildren. They're not creepy. They're just old, and they do things. But they don't grab them by the shoulders and sniff their hair and rub noses just in front of a crowd of
with
people
you've
or
just
whatever.
Met.
Right.
I've never gone up to somebody at a political event and gone up to them and said, hey, you did a great job speaking. Let me rub noses with you. What? Oh my God.
That's some funny shit.
So I mentioned a couple times I'm in these Democratic groups. I pulled a couple screenshots from the posts that I've been seeing, going against Lucy Flores. So there's an image here that it's 5 pictures, 3 of which, Jesus, I can't talk, are of her and Bernie Sanders. And Bernie's, standing next to her, has his arm around her. In one of them, he has his hand on her shoulder. And they say, this is perfectly fine. This is okay. But Biden coming up to her and putting his hands on her shoulders and kissing her head is not okay. Clearly, she is bad news, and she's using this as a political tool.
Well, yeah, because the picture was Bernie Sanders like having his arm around her, like as if she's a buddy.
A photo op.
Yeah,
right,
not inhaling her hair.
Yeah.
Right.
And the issue here that everyone I've seen is missing is consent. She is clearly consenting to Bernie Sanders putting his arm around her for a picture, or coming up behind her for a picture that is clearly like she is consenting to this. It's not a creepy come up behind you and sniff large portions of your hair and then kiss you weird before you're about to go on stage. And people are saying, well, she hugged Bill Clinton on stage one time too, so that's okay, but yet Biden can't touch her. No, nobody can touch a woman, or anybody for that matter, without their implied consent. At bare minimum, implied consent. someone comes up to me for a hug and I back away, obviously that's not implied consent. But if I go in for a hug, that's implied consent, clearly.
Right.
There is no implied consent in this situation at all. And people drawing this parallel of, well, it was okay when Bill Clinton hugged her, but not okay when Biden sniffs her hair. No. For a political movement that pushes consent so much, well, at least when it's politically convenient for them, you would think that they would be very clear in this distinction, but no, it's completely gone. They don't care. They only care about their side winning at all costs. So believe women is out the window. Me Too, out the window. It doesn't matter as long as a Republican is going down and not a Democrat.
Right. Yep.
Another one.
And it shoots both ways.
Yeah. And another one
For sure.
I found wonderful here. Looks like the knives are out for Biden. What did he do? Kiss a woman's hair years ago? The Democrats are eating their own. Biden has a realistic chance of winning. Can't have that. He must not be liberal enough. The Democrats need to nominate a woman. I don't think that a man can survive scrutiny from Democratic special interest groups. Oh my God. How can you politicize this any further? I can't even fathom what's going through these people's heads when they're just completely dismissing everything that they've ever said about every other sexual harassment case. What does that mean? What did he do? Kiss a woman's hair years ago? Okay, you're talking about Kavanaugh from 40 years ago at a party, and all that stuff was disproven?
Exactly. You didn't know. Forget that. That's not the same.
Yeah, this was 5 years ago. At a political event while he was vice president using his position of power. It's exploitation.
Nope. Being grandfatherly.
Yeah,
that's all.
Yeah, being grandfatherly, sniffing.
Not like Kavanaugh, who was a raving lunatic monster at 16 years old.
Who really liked beer.
This was grandfatherly. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just mind blowing to me that Biden has a realistic chance of winning. Who gives a shit? Trump had a realistic chance of winning, and you tried to tear him down completely, and rightfully so. I'm not a Trump fan.
Yeah, totally.
I'm not defending Trump here, but this is such a double standard. You have to apply stuff like this across the board because sexual assault and sexual harassment is not a political issue. It needs to be classified as a separate cultural issue, something that we need to change, and we need to apply scrutiny equally across the board, no matter who the politician or the person in power is, or whoever it is. It doesn't matter their political background. Creeps are creeps, and they're in every political movement, every ideology, every corner of every part of this country. There are creeps. Yep. Working at a job, there are creeps everywhere. It has to be applied equally, and when it isn't, you're the problem.
Well,
it's not an issue because it's a Democrat. They're the problem here.
It's that tribalism that turns people off. So you just get done being told what the standards are for behavior, and then you turn around and you excuse somebody from those same standards because they're on your team. And people are like, nope, done, whatever, don't care what's on TV. It's almost as if it's by design, not to keep pulling out the tinfoil hat, but it's almost like it's by design. Yeah.
And, the thing is, she may be doing this for political reasons. I honestly don't think she is, because she did just come out and say, if it's Biden or Trump, I'm voting Biden. I don't think that she's trying to screw people. But even if that was the case, even if she's getting paid by Democratic special interest groups for another candidate, it still happened. And it's still behavior that we need to scrutinize.
Yeah, and it's behavior that you can see.
Yeah, and the dangers of politicizing sexual harassment and unwanted behavior are just astronomical. You get it to where it's being used as a political tool more often than not, and you damage women's credibility. Because unfortunately, we do live in a collectivist society. People, use classifications and collective labels all the time. So when something happens to a woman and she's labeled as a liar or whatever, it does hurt all women. And I hate saying that, but it's the truth. Women aren't believed as much. Women have to go through extra steps to try and prove what happened to them. it's extremely dangerous because politics is what's, on the main stage as much as possible, almost over Hollywood issues. Politics is front and center all the time, 24/7. So when you see the most well-known cases of sexual harassment and sexual assault on the political stage and everything being politicized and, oh, we don't believe her, or, okay, we believe this one, that translates to all cases of sexual harassment and sexual assault. That's the attitude that the average person will carry with them when they encounter these things in their daily lives.
Especially when, again, and you can see, you can visually take in a pattern of behavior from this man that fits everything she and others are saying. And, rather than defend it, I mean, I just, I don't know. It's not surprising, but it floors you at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. This one, the reactions to it, especially, it really threw me for a loop. Like, finding out Biden is a creep really didn't shock me at all. I mean,
yeah, you can see
it's been kind of a meme for a while that he's
right.
He doesn't understand the concept of personal space or how to not be a total creep. So,
well, and that's, again, as you mentioned, and after going through the Kavanaugh hearings and getting, okay, this is, like you said earlier, all women are to be believed. We have to at least hear them out. You should give them the time. You should take their accusations seriously. To blow off what you can see with your own two eyes. I mean, it's fucking bizarro world, man.
It's
really
disgusting.
Is.
But this is the state of political discourse in 2019. Everything is politicized. Really, really not looking forward to 2020 and the presidential race then, because I swear I can't even tell what's fake news anymore. Just everything's just insane.
If nothing else, we'll have plenty to talk about.
Yeah. Well, before we go, is there anything you guys want to plug before we call it?
I would just say, hey, hit all of our social media, Twitter, Instagram, all of it.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, and you had a Liberty Bites episode that you did recently.
I did. I've been alternating every other week with the lovely and talented William Gadsden. So, check out our Liberty Bites episodes and everything else on the Think Liberty Podcast Network. It's awesome.
Your episode was
subscribe.
It was about Kim Ruff, right? As
the most recent one was about Kim and John. Yeah, about their candidacy.
Nice.
And I kind of make the case, I know a lot of people are worried about name recognition, but I don't think that's as critical this time. I think there's an opportunity. I think people are going to be paying attention because, for some reason, the media likes to say that Trump's libertarian or that libertarians like Trump. So I really think our candidate's going to get a little more airplay this year. So why not run some real libertarians?
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Well, everybody should check out the Kim Ruff and what's the other guy's name?
John Phillips.
John Phillips for President 2020. Check out their page and make sure and follow them. We're big fans. I just want to remind our listeners that Think Liberty isn't just a podcast. We're also on all social media platforms. Just search Think Liberty on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and any other platforms you use. And go to our website, think-liberty.com, for original articles covering all your favorite libertarian topics. Check out the shop on the website as well, where you can find tons of original designs for shirts, hoodies, or whatever you're looking for. And before you're done listening, make sure and subscribe to the Think Liberty Podcast Network for almost daily uploads of new shows. Leave us a review and tell a friend. That's the best way we can grow as a network. I appreciate everyone's time this week, and whether you like it or not, we'll probably be back.